You see the headlines about climate change all the time, right? Big, often confusing numbers. Well, today we're going to zoom in on the story of one single country, India. And its story is, frankly, a massive paradox, one that's absolutely critical for the future of our planet. So let's get into it.
Okay, so first things first. Let's talk about the big, flashy number that really put India in the global climate spotlight this year. It's one of those stats that really makes you stop and think.
All right, I've got a question for you, just to get us started. If you had to guess which country had the single largest jump in its greenhouse gas emissions in 2024, we're not talking total, just the biggest absolute increase. Who do you think it was?
Well, the answer is India. And the number is just huge. 165 million tons of CO₂ equivalent. And let's be really clear here. That's not the total. That's just the increase. The biggest jump of any single nation on the planet last year. Wow.
So what does that actually mean? Well, it puts India in the #1 spot for year-over-year emissions growth. And it also means it's holding steady as the world's third largest emitter overall, right after China and the US. So yeah, in terms of sheer volume, India is a giant player. But, and this is a big but, that is not the whole story. Not even close.
So to really get what's going on, we need to look at this from a totally different angle. We've got to stop looking at the country as a whole and zoom way in, down to the individual person.
And this quote right here, this is it. This is the core of the whole paradox. Even with those gigantic total emissions we just talked about, the average person in India actually has a really small carbon footprint. I mean, surprisingly small. It's this crazy tension, right? Huge total numbers, but tiny individual numbers.
Okay, so how low is low? Well, get this. The average person in India emits about 3 tons of CO₂ equivalent. The global average? That's 6.4 tons. So we're talking less than half the world average. That is a massive, massive difference. And this chart just lays it all out perfectly. You can see India's bar right there, so much smaller than the world average next to it. But then look over at a country like the United States. I mean, its bar is way above even the global average. It just goes to show you how different the daily carbon impact of one person can be, depending on where you live.
Okay, but here comes the twist. There's always a twist, right? That low per person number in India, it's not staying low. In fact, it's growing, and it's growing fast. We're talking a 3.6% increase in just 1 year. To put that in perspective, the global average barely moved. It grew by just 0.04%. So that super fast growth rate, that's the reason everyone is watching India so carefully right now.
All right, so let's pull back a bit, because what's happening in India isn't just about India. It's one piece of a much bigger and honestly pretty concerning global picture. So, globally, in 2024, humanity put 57.7 gigatons of CO₂ equivalent into the atmosphere. And that isn't just another big number. It is a new all-time record high, the most we have ever emitted in a single year. We're still going up, not down.
So where is it all coming from? No real surprise here. The main culprit, by a long shot, is burning fossil fuels for energy. That's almost 70% of the total. Methane is another big piece of the pie. It's pretty clear that our global energy diet is still the #1 problem.
And check this out. The problem is really concentrated. Just a handful of countries, the G20, the world's biggest economies, including India, of course, are responsible for 77% of all those emissions. 77%. That really tells you why what these specific countries decide to do or not do has such a huge impact on all of us.
Okay, so with all that as backdrop, what has India actually promised to do about all this? Are they living up to their word? Let's take a look at their commitments and their report card.
All right, these are the big 3 promises India made to the world. They're officially called NDCs. Basically, they've pledged to 1. Make their economy way more efficient so it produces less carbon for every dollar of growth. 2. Get half of their electricity from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030. And 3. Plant a massive number of trees to soak up CO₂ from the air. These are definitely not small goals. They're pretty ambitious.
So, how are they doing? Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The good news is they're actually on track to hit those 2030 targets we just mentioned. In fact, they're ahead of schedule. That's great. But on the other hand, there's some criticism. Experts say their long-term net zero plan is kind of vague, and maybe more importantly, they've missed a big deadline for submitting their next round of climate goals, which they were supposed to do.
And all of this really boils down to one huge fundamental question. You've got a country,
India, that has a moral imperative to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. That takes energy, it takes growth, but right now that growth is also fueling this massive increase in emissions. So the real challenge here isn't just for India, it's this. Is there a way for a developing country to build prosperity for its people without following the same high-carbon path that developed nations took? Finding answer to that is maybe the single biggest challenge of our climate future.